The woman everyone pitied that night was the only person in the ballroom who already knew how the story would end. Crystal chandeliers poured rivers of golden light across the marble floor of the Grand Astoria Ballroom in Manhattan, casting reflections that shimmered like liquid gold beneath the polished shoes of New York's elite. Laughter floated through the air alongside the soft notes of a live string quartet, while champagne glasses clinked beneath ceilings so high they seemed to disappear into the glow above. It was the kind of evening people dreamed about and magazines wrote about. The annual Montgomery Foundation Gala had become one of the most exclusive social events on the East Coast, attracting CEOs, politicians, celebrities, and investors from across the country. Yet despite the luxury surrounding them, a strange silence was beginning to spread through the room. It started with a whisper. Then another. Then dozens more. At the center of it all stood Vanessa Brooks. Her crimson gown flowed elegantly to the floor, catching the chandelier light with every subtle movement. The color had once symbolized love. Then loyalty. Tonight, it represented something entirely different. Power. Vanessa stood alone near the edge of the ballroom, her posture straight, her expression calm, her dark eyes fixed on nothing and everything at once. At 34 years old, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent years building things that mattered. Yet to everyone watching, she appeared to be the tragic figure of the evening. The betrayed wife. The woman who had lost. The woman being replaced. Across the room, Charlotte Kensington's laughter rang out above the music. The beautiful blonde socialite stood beside Ethan Montgomery as though she already owned the future. Her white designer gown sparkled beneath the lights. Diamond earrings glittered against her hair. One manicured hand rested lightly on Ethan's arm while cameras flashed around them. Together they looked like the picture-perfect couple society adored. At least on the surface. Charlotte leaned toward a group of guests and whispered something that sent them into uncomfortable laughter. Several eyes immediately shifted toward Vanessa. More whispers followed. More smiles. More glances. The humiliation was becoming public now. Deliberate. Calculated. Cruel in a way that required no raised voice. Ethan saw it happening. Everyone saw it happening. Yet no one intervened. Not even him. Especially not him. Vanessa slowly lifted her champagne glass. The crystal felt cool against her fingertips. She listened to the distant music. She watched the lights dance across the ballroom walls. She noticed the sympathy in some faces, the curiosity in others, and the satisfaction in a few. Most people assumed they understood what they were witnessing. A husband choosing another woman. A marriage collapsing beneath the weight of betrayal. A wife standing alone while her replacement celebrated victory. They believed the story was already over. They believed Vanessa simply hadn't accepted it yet. What none of them knew was that the most important chapter had not even begun. Charlotte suddenly turned toward Vanessa from across the ballroom. Their eyes met. The younger woman smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of someone convinced she had already won. For a brief moment, the room seemed to pause around them. The music softened. Conversations faded. Even the chandeliers appeared frozen in time. Then something unexpected happened. Vanessa smiled back. Not a wounded smile. Not a bitter smile. A knowing one. Small. Controlled. Almost impossible to notice. But if anyone had looked closely, they would have seen it. And if Charlotte had understood what that smile truly meant, she might have left the party before the truth arrived. 10 years earlier, long before whispers followed her across marble floors and crystal chandeliers reflected silent judgments, Vanessa Brooks had been standing in a cramped office no larger than 300 square feet above a struggling print shop in Brooklyn. Rain tapped against the narrow windows while stacks of unpaid invoices covered every available surface. The company was barely surviving. The computers were outdated. The furniture had come from second-hand stores. Yet Vanessa looked at the chaos and saw possibility. Across from her sat Ethan Montgomery, younger then, ambitious and determined, his sleeves rolled up as he studied financial projections deep into the night. Back then there had been no luxury penthouses, no private jets, and certainly no glamorous galas. There had only been two people sharing a dream bigger than themselves. Vanessa was the strategist. Ethan was the salesman. Together they worked weekends, holidays, and countless sleepless nights building what would eventually become Montgomery Holdings. While Ethan charmed investors in conference rooms, Vanessa stayed behind balancing budgets, negotiating contracts, and finding solutions whenever disaster threatened to sink them. More than once, the company survived because of decisions she made quietly behind the scenes. Investors often remembered Ethan because he stood under the spotlight. Few remembered the woman who made certain the spotlight never went out. Their wedding came during those difficult years. It was held in a small church outside Philadelphia with fewer than 50 guests. Vanessa still remembered the warmth of Ethan's hand as he slipped the simple gold ring onto her finger. No reporters attended. No photographers from society magazines appeared. They had celebrated afterward at a neighborhood restaurant where family and friends filled the room with laughter and hope. At the time, it felt perfect. As the years passed, success arrived slowly and then all at once. New offices opened. Revenue doubled. Then doubled again. Montgomery Holdings expanded across multiple states. The modest office in Brooklyn became a glass tower overlooking Manhattan. Their names appeared in business magazines. Their photographs filled industry publications. People called them an inspirational couple. They called each other partners. Yet somewhere between board meetings and billion-dollar deals, the distance began growing. At first it was subtle. Ethan traveled more frequently. Important dinners replaced quiet evenings at home. Phone calls became shorter. Conversations became rushed. Vanessa told herself it was simply the cost of success. Every growing company demanded sacrifices. Every ambitious dream required long hours. She believed in him because she always had. She trusted him because she always had. Looking back, she would later realize that trust had never been the mistake. Trust was what made great things possible. The mistake was believing that everyone valued loyalty as deeply as she did. Back in the ballroom, the orchestra transitioned into a slower melody as guests continued to gather around Ethan and Charlotte. Vanessa lowered her champagne glass and glanced briefly toward the stage where the evening's keynote presentation would soon begin. Around her, people still assumed they understood her story. They thought they were witnessing the final chapter of a woman being left behind. None of them knew that the foundation beneath their assumptions had already begun to crack. And somewhere inside the ballroom, hidden among hundreds of smiling faces, the first piece of the truth was quietly moving into place. The first sign was not a message. It was silence. For nearly a decade, Ethan had always called before boarding a flight, before entering a meeting, before ending a long day. The habit had become part of the rhythm of their marriage, as familiar as morning coffee and the gold wedding ring resting on Vanessa's finger. Then one evening, the call never came. Vanessa sat alone in their Manhattan penthouse watching the city lights flicker beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Midnight arrived. Then 1 o'clock. Ethan finally walked through the door just after 2 in the morning carrying the exhaustion of someone who claimed to have spent the entire night negotiating an important acquisition. She believed him. At the time, she wanted to believe him. Weeks later, another small detail appeared. During a charity luncheon, Ethan received a text message and instinctively turned his phone away. The movement lasted less than a second. Most people would never have noticed it. Vanessa did. Not because she was suspicious, but because she knew him. She had spent 10 years studying every expression, every habit, every subtle shift in his behavior. The man she loved was beginning to act like someone guarding a secret. Still, she said nothing. Trust was not something she abandoned at the first sign of uncertainty. Then came the business trips. Chicago, Miami, Los Angeles. Trips that seemed to multiply without explanation. Meetings that appeared on calendars only after flights had already been booked. Dinners that ran late into the evening. Conferences that somehow produced very few results. Each explanation sounded reasonable on its own. Together, they formed a pattern Vanessa could no longer ignore. One rainy afternoon she entered Ethan's office carrying documents that required his signature. The room was empty. His assistant explained he had stepped into a private call. As Vanessa placed the papers on his desk, her eyes landed on a small gift box resting near his computer. Inside was a diamond bracelet. Elegant. Expensive. Beautiful. Attached to it was a handwritten card. There was no name. No signature. Only 6 words. Thank you for making me feel seen. Vanessa closed the box and quietly returned it to exactly where she had found it. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass walls of the office. Calm. Composed. Unshaken. Yet something cold settled inside her chest. Not anger. Not jealousy. Recognition. The following months brought more fragments. A dinner reservation cancelled at the last minute. A forgotten anniversary lunch. A photograph on social media showing Charlotte Kensington standing beside Ethan at an event he had claimed not to attend. Each clue by itself was harmless. Together they painted a picture Vanessa no longer wanted to deny. The most painful part was not discovering another woman. It was realizing how long she had been protecting a version of Ethan that no longer existed. Back in the ballroom, Charlotte laughed again as cameras followed her every movement. Ethan remained beside her beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers. Around them, guests admired what appeared to be the city's newest power couple. Vanessa watched quietly from across the room. They thought the secret affair had destroyed her. They thought betrayal had left her powerless. What they did not know was that long before this gala began, Vanessa had already stopped searching for proof. She had found something far more valuable. The truth. 3 weeks. Before the gala, Vanessa received an invitation that should never have felt unusual. The envelope arrived at the penthouse on thick cream-colored stationery embossed with the silver crest of the Montgomery Foundation. It looked identical to every invitation she and Ethan had received over the years. Yet something about it felt different the moment she opened it. The event was being promoted as the most important gala in the Foundation's history, a celebration of growth, leadership, and the future. Her name appeared on the guest list. Ethan's name appeared on the guest list. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Still, as she read the details beneath the glow of the city skyline outside her window, an uneasy feeling settled over her. That evening Ethan arrived home later than usual. His charcoal overcoat carried traces of rain from the streets below. Vanessa stood in the kitchen preparing tea when she casually mentioned the gala. For the briefest moment, something flickered across his face. Surprise. Then discomfort. Then a smile carefully placed where honesty should have been. He told her the event would be important for investors. He said attendance was expected. He encouraged her to come. The words sounded polite. Supportive, even. Yet they felt rehearsed. Vanessa nodded and changed the subject, but she could not shake the feeling that Ethan was not inviting her because he wanted her beside him. He was inviting her because he wanted her to witness something. Over the following days, clues began appearing everywhere. Society blogs suddenly featured photographs of Ethan and Charlotte attending charity events together. Industry reporters started asking unusual questions about leadership succession at Montgomery Holdings. Anonymous online rumors speculated about changes inside the company. Even acquaintances who had not called in years began reaching out with carefully disguised curiosity. Vanessa recognized the pattern. Someone was preparing a narrative. Someone was laying the foundation for a public announcement before the announcement itself arrived. One afternoon, while attending a board meeting, she noticed several executives exchange nervous glances when her name entered the conversation. Their behavior was subtle but unmistakable. They knew something. Or at least they believed they did. Later that evening, Vanessa stood alone in her dressing room. The city glowed beyond the glass walls like a sea of scattered diamonds. Inside her closet hung the crimson gown she had worn only once before. Her fingertips brushed the fabric. It reminded her of another version of herself. A woman who believed loyalty guaranteed protection. A woman who thought love alone could secure a future. That woman no longer existed. The morning of the gala arrived wrapped in clear skies and autumn sunlight. News outlets buzzed with excitement about the event. Photographers prepared their equipment. Social media influencers posted predictions about surprise announcements. By sunset, black luxury vehicles lined the entrance of the Grand Astoria ballroom. Guests arrived dressed in designer labels and expensive confidence. As Vanessa stepped from her car, camera flashes illuminated the evening air. Heads turned immediately. Whispers followed. Not because she looked defeated. Quite the opposite. There was something about her composure that unsettled people. The calm was too complete. The confidence too steady. It was the confidence of someone who had already seen the ending. Across the ballroom, Charlotte greeted guests as though she belonged there. Ethan remained at her side. Together they waited beneath the crystal chandeliers while conversations swirled around them. They believed tonight would confirm their version of the story. What neither of them realized was that another story had already begun unfolding behind the scenes. And before the night was over, the entire room would be forced to choose which version of the truth it believed. The orchestra reached the end of a graceful melody just as the master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage. Applause rippled through the ballroom while hundreds of guests turned their attention toward the spotlight. Crystal chandeliers scattered warm light across the room, transforming every glass, every diamond, every polished surface into something almost magical. From a distance, the evening looked flawless. Up close, it felt like a performance balanced on the edge of collapse. Charlotte Kensington seemed determined to become the center of that performance. With effortless confidence, she guided Ethan through clusters of investors, philanthropists, and reporters. Her laughter carried above the crowd. Her smile appeared in every photograph. More than once, Vanessa noticed Charlotte glancing in her direction, as though measuring the effect of every carefully chosen gesture. Then it happened. During a conversation near the center of the ballroom, Charlotte raised her champagne glass and addressed a group of guests loud enough for nearby tables to hear. She spoke about new beginnings. About knowing when it was time to move forward. About how some people held on to the past for too long. The words sounded innocent on the surface. They were designed not to be. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. Others exchanged knowing looks. A few reporters quietly lifted their phones. Ethan stood beside Charlotte and said nothing. The silence was louder than any agreement. Vanessa remained near the edge of the ballroom, her crimson gown glowing beneath the chandelier light. She did not interrupt. She did not defend herself. She simply watched. Charlotte mistook that silence for weakness. Encouraged, she continued. She spoke about ambition. About confidence. About how success required people who understood the future rather than clinging to history. Every sentence landed exactly where she intended. Each remark carried an invisible target. Around the room, whispers multiplied. Some guests looked away. Others leaned closer. The atmosphere shifted from celebration to spectacle. Charlotte believed she was winning. The more attention she received, the brighter she seemed to shine. Yet something unexpected began happening. The room was not reacting to Charlotte. It was reacting to Vanessa. Guests watched the woman being humiliated and found no humiliation. They searched for tears and found none. They expected anger and discovered composure. Vanessa stood with the quiet dignity of someone who no longer needed validation from anyone in the room. That confidence unsettled people. It unsettled Charlotte most of all. Then a hotel attendant entered through a side doorway carrying a sealed navy blue envelope. At first, nobody paid attention. The attendant crossed the ballroom and approached the event coordinator. A brief conversation followed. Expressions changed. Heads turned. The coordinator looked toward the stage, then toward Ethan, then finally toward Vanessa. Something important had arrived. Vanessa noticed immediately. Her eyes settled on the envelope. For the first time all evening, a faint smile touched her lips. It was not triumph. It was certainty. Charlotte saw the smile and hesitated. Only for a second. But in that second, confidence gave way to confusion. Ethan noticed it too. His gaze followed the envelope as the coordinator hurried toward the stage. The ballroom slowly quieted. Conversations faded. The orchestra stopped playing. Somewhere beneath the glow of 1,000 crystal reflections, the atmosphere changed completely. Nobody understood why. Not yet. But every instinct in the room recognized the same thing. The evening everyone thought they understood was about to become something entirely different. The coordinator stepped onto the stage holding the navy blue envelope with both hands, and the uncertainty that had been floating through the ballroom suddenly became impossible to ignore. Hundreds of guests watched in silence as he approached the podium. The crystal chandeliers above seemed brighter now, their reflections frozen across rows of champagne glasses and polished marble. Ethan's jaw tightened. Charlotte's confident smile faded ever so slightly. Neither of them understood why the atmosphere had changed, but both could feel it. The coordinator cleared his throat and glanced toward the front row where several members of the Montgomery Holdings board sat unusually still. Then he spoke. Ladies and gentlemen, before we continue with tonight's program, we have received an official communication from the company's legal counsel regarding matters of corporate governance. The room immediately stiffened. Corporate governance was not the language of galas and charity auctions. It was the language of boardrooms, contracts, and power. Ethan straightened in place. Charlotte looked from face to face, searching for reassurance. Instead, she found concern. The coordinator carefully opened the envelope and removed several documents. The sound of paper unfolding echoed through the silence. Effective immediately, he continued, the board of directors has requested that a previously sealed corporate agreement be entered into the public record. A murmur spread across the ballroom. Reporters lifted their phones. Investors exchanged puzzled looks. Ethan took a single step forward. What agreement? He asked, his voice controlled but noticeably strained. The coordinator did not answer. Instead, he looked toward the entrance. Every head in the room turned. A distinguished man in a dark suit entered the ballroom accompanied by two senior attorneys from one of New York's most respected law firms. The sight alone was enough to drain color from several faces. Vanessa recognized them immediately. So did the board members. The senior attorney approached the stage and accepted the documents. 10 years ago, he said calmly, when Montgomery Holdings was facing insolvency during its expansion phase, a private rescue agreement was executed to secure the company's future. The room fell completely silent. Ethan stared at him. What are you talking about? The attorney continued without hesitation. The agreement established a controlling trust containing the majority voting shares necessary to protect the company from hostile acquisition and financial collapse. Charlotte frowned. Most of the guests did not fully understand the legal language, but they understood one thing. Something important was happening. The attorney turned another page. The trust remained confidential at the request of its principal beneficiary until such time as disclosure became necessary. Across the ballroom, Vanessa stood perfectly still. Her crimson gown shimmered beneath the lights. Her expression never changed. The attorney finally lifted his eyes from the document. "Tonight," he said, "that disclosure has become necessary." Ethan's confidence began to fracture. For the first time all evening, uncertainty appeared in his eyes. Charlotte reached for his arm, but even she seemed unsure of what was unfolding. The attorney looked directly toward Vanessa. Then he spoke the words that caused the entire ballroom to stop breathing. The controlling trust that protected Montgomery Holdings for the past decade was established and funded by Vanessa Brooks. The silence that followed felt almost sacred. No music. No whispers. No movement. Only shock. And as every face in the room slowly turned toward Vanessa, the woman everyone believed had lost suddenly became the most powerful person in the building. For several seconds, nobody moved. The attorney's words seemed to linger beneath the crystal chandeliers long after he had finished speaking. Faces that moments earlier had been filled with amusement now reflected disbelief. Reporters lowered their phones only to raise them again. Investors exchanged stunned glances. Even the waitstaff appeared frozen in place. The entire ballroom had been forced to confront a reality none of them expected. Vanessa Brooks was not standing on the sidelines of the empire. She had been holding it together all along. Ethan stared across the room as though he were seeing his wife for the first time. Memories rushed through his mind with merciless clarity. The emergency financing that had saved the company during its darkest year. The acquisition opportunities that had appeared at exactly the right moment. The investors who had unexpectedly remained loyal when others walked away. For years he had accepted those victories as part of the company's natural growth. Now he understood there had been an architect behind the curtain. Vanessa. The attorney continued reading from the documents. The trust agreement grants full controlling authority to Vanessa Brooks regarding board composition, executive leadership, and strategic governance decisions. A collective gasp swept through the room. Charlotte's fingers slowly slipped away from Ethan's arm. The confidence she had worn all evening was disappearing piece by piece. "That cannot be right," she said quietly. "There must be some mistake." But nobody answered her. Nobody even looked at her. For the first time that night, she was no longer the center of attention. The board members rose from their seats one after another. Several approached Vanessa directly. Their expressions carried a mixture of respect and relief. Many of them had known portions of the truth for years, bound by confidentiality agreements that prevented disclosure. Tonight those restrictions no longer existed. One of the senior directors stepped forward. "Ms. Brooks," he said respectfully, "the board would like to formally acknowledge your contributions to the company and your continued leadership." The title struck the room like another revelation. Not Mrs. Montgomery. Not Ethan's wife. Ms. Brooks. A leader in her own right. Vanessa set her champagne glass onto a nearby table. The crystal made a soft sound against the polished surface. Then she began walking toward the stage. Every eye followed her. The crimson gown moved like flowing silk beneath the golden lights. She did not rush. She did not appear triumphant. She carried herself with the same calm dignity that had unsettled everyone from the beginning of the evening. Ethan stepped forward. "Vanessa," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She paused briefly but did not stop. There had been a time when hearing her name from him would have changed everything. Tonight it changed nothing. She reached the stage and accepted the documents from the attorney. The ballroom remained silent. Thousands of assumptions had collapsed within a matter of minutes. The woman many had quietly pitied was now standing beneath the spotlight holding authority greater than anyone had imagined. Vanessa looked across the room. Her gaze passed over reporters, investors, board members, and finally rested on Ethan and Charlotte. Neither of them could hold her eyes for long. Then she offered the smallest of smiles. Not a smile of revenge. Not a smile of victory. A smile of truth finally revealed. And somehow, that smile carried more power than anything else that had happened that night. The aftermath began before the gala officially ended. News traveled through the ballroom faster than music ever could. Investors who had spent years seeking Ethan's attention now found themselves quietly introducing themselves to Vanessa. Reporters who arrived expecting a society story suddenly realized they were witnessing one of the most significant corporate revelations in recent memory. The atmosphere transformed completely. Charlotte stood near the center of the room, but the spotlight she had enjoyed all evening was gone. Conversations shifted away from her. Cameras pointed elsewhere. The admiration she had mistaken for loyalty disappeared with startling speed. Across the ballroom, members of the board gathered around Vanessa with a level of respect that no longer needed to be hidden. They discussed transition plans, governance procedures, and the future of Montgomery Holdings. Every conversation reinforced the same reality. Vanessa was not being elevated. She was simply being recognized. Ethan remained motionless for several moments, struggling to process the collapse of a narrative he had believed for years. He had convinced himself that success belonged primarily to him. That the company reflected his vision. That the foundation beneath his life was permanent. Now he understood something far more difficult. The strongest pillars supporting that foundation had always been standing quietly beside him. And he had failed to see them. As guests slowly departed beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers, the evening air outside Manhattan felt colder than before. Headlines began appearing online before midnight. Financial analysts discussed the implications. Business commentators praised Vanessa's long-term stewardship. By sunrise, the story had reached every major financial publication in the country. The weeks that followed brought changes few people could have imagined. The board announced a restructuring plan supported by the controlling trust. New leadership initiatives were introduced. Investor confidence increased rather than declined. Market performance strengthened. The company did not stumble under the weight of the revelation. It flourished. Vanessa approached each decision with the same discipline that had guided her for years. No dramatic speeches. No public attacks. No attempts to embarrass anyone. She focused entirely on the future. That restraint earned even greater respect. Meanwhile, Charlotte discovered that attention and influence were not the same thing. Invitations became less frequent. Interviews disappeared. The social circles that had embraced her so enthusiastically moved on to new topics and new faces. She had mistaken proximity to power for power itself. The difference became impossible to ignore. Ethan experienced the deepest transformation of all. For the first time in many years, he was forced to sit alone with the consequences of his choices. He replayed conversations he had ignored. Sacrifices he had taken for granted. Moments when Vanessa had quietly protected both him and the company without asking for recognition. Regret arrived slowly. Then all at once. One evening, nearly 6 months after the gala, Ethan stood outside the glass headquarters of Montgomery Holdings and looked up at the illuminated executive floor. A corner office overlooked the Manhattan skyline. Light still glowed from within. He knew Vanessa was working. Building. Leading. Moving forward. The empire remained standing because she had never stopped protecting it. Ethan lowered his eyes and quietly turned away. For the first time, he understood that losing power was not the greatest consequence of betrayal. The greatest consequence was realizing the value of someone only after they had learned how to live without you. 1 year later, the Grand Astoria ballroom glowed beneath the same crystal chandeliers that had witnessed the unraveling of so many illusions. Golden light spilled across marble floors. A string quartet filled the air with elegant melodies. Manhattan sparkled beyond towering windows like a field of stars scattered across the night. Yet everything felt different. The atmosphere carried confidence rather than tension. Respect rather than speculation. The annual Montgomery Foundation Gala had returned, but this time the story belonged to someone entirely different. Vanessa Brooks stood near the stage wearing a new crimson gown, its color rich and radiant beneath the lights. The dress reminded some guests of the woman they had seen 1 year earlier. The difference was that now nobody looked at her with pity. They looked at her with admiration. Under her leadership, Montgomery Holdings had achieved its strongest year in company history. New charitable initiatives expanded across the country. Scholarships had been funded. Communities had benefited. Employees spoke of a culture built on integrity rather than image. Vanessa had become more than a successful executive. She had become a symbol of quiet strength. Throughout the evening, guests approached her with congratulations and gratitude. Investors praised her vision. Journalists requested interviews. Young entrepreneurs asked for advice. She accepted every compliment with the same grace she had shown when facing criticism. Success had not changed her character. It had simply revealed it. As the evening progressed, the master of ceremonies invited Vanessa to address the audience. Applause filled the ballroom as she stepped beneath the spotlight. For a moment she looked across the room. Crystal reflections danced in hundreds of attentive eyes. Then she began speaking. Not about betrayal. Not about victory. Not about the painful events that had brought her here. She spoke about resilience. About responsibility. About building something meaningful even when circumstances encourage bitterness. Her words carried no resentment. That surprised many people. It was easier to understand revenge than forgiveness. Easier to understand anger than peace. Yet Vanessa had chosen a different path. Near the back of the ballroom stood Ethan Montgomery. Time had softened the confidence he once carried so effortlessly. He listened quietly as Vanessa spoke. There was no bitterness in his expression. Only understanding. During the past year he had come to recognize the full weight of what he had lost. Not merely a marriage. Not merely influence. He had lost the partnership of the one person who had believed in him long before success arrived. When the speech ended, the ballroom rose to its feet in a standing ovation. Vanessa smiled warmly and stepped away from the podium. Later that evening, Ethan approached her for the first time in months. The music played softly around them while guests mingled beneath the chandeliers. I am sorry, he said simply. For everything. Vanessa looked at him for a moment. The gold of the ballroom lights reflected in her eyes. Then she nodded. I know. There was no anger left between them. Only truth. Ethan lowered his gaze. I spent a long time hoping for another chance. Vanessa offered a gentle smile. And I spent a long time learning who I was without needing one. The answer was kind. Final. Peaceful. Outside, Manhattan shimmered beneath the night sky. Inside, the music continued. Ethan accepted her words with quiet dignity. Vanessa turned and walked back toward the celebration waiting for her. The crimson gown caught the chandelier light one final time as she disappeared into the crowd. Sometimes the greatest victory is not proving others wrong. Sometimes it is becoming so strong that their opinion no longer matters. And as the evening carried on around her, Vanessa Brooks stood exactly where she belonged. Not as someone's wife. Not as someone's replacement. But as the author of her own future.